Things Podcast. Hey, Phantomaniacs, welcome to the newest episode of the Needless Things Podcast, where we talk about toys, movies, music, and all manner of pop culture dorkery. I am your host, Dave, and I've got a lot of stuff that I've got to throw at you during the intro. You know how busy it is this time of year. Oddly enough, not much of it is Dragon Con related, but today's episode is Dragon Con related, so I want to be sure and tell you what that's about before I run down our busy intro bullet points. Today's episode is an interview with a gentleman named Kirk Thatcher. He has done it all. He is like this amazing pop culture nerdery Renaissance man. You're going to be absolutely amazed at the things that he has to share, the stories that he tells, and all of the things that he's been involved with. But this is, in theory, this is the first part, and we decided this while we were doing the interview. This is the first part of a two-part interview. Today's episode is about all of the stuff he's done that doesn't directly involve the Muppets puppetry Jim Henson. Because I am supposed to be moderating a panel with Kirk at Dragon Con for the Puppetry Track. Now, as of right now, there's a conflict and I can't do it, but hopefully that will be resolved and everything will be cool, because that should be the second part of this interview, where we'll get into the Henson years and everything that he's done with puppetry. But we talk about Star Wars, Star Trek, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. It's a wide-ranging... he's awesome. He's absolutely amazing. He's a great storyteller. Quite frankly, this was almost like a vacation for me, just because all I would have to do is say Star Trek 4, and boom, we're off to the races with just fascinating stuff. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to him. He was an absolutely wonderful guy. You guys are going to love this episode. But before we get to this wonderful episode, there are a couple of things that I actually had to make a list this time, because there's stuff that I just know I have to address. First of all, I said a couple weeks ago that the August commentary was very exciting. I honestly, at this point, cannot remember if I told you what it was or not yet. But unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, the August commentary, needless commentary, will be postponed until September, because I just have too much other great stuff that has to go up in August prior to Dragon Con. It's just how scheduling worked out. You know, sometimes surprises pop up, sometimes things happen that I've been very happy with the fact that we've had a commentary monthly basically since the first one, which was Big Trouble in Little China. And even though that wasn't officially a needless commentary, that is where they started. But since then, we've had one a month, and we have to skip August this year. I will try to plan a little bit better next year, but you know, we do the best we can. But trust me, September's commentary, it's in the can. It's fantastic. I hate that you have to wait for it, but you got to wait for it because we've got so much good stuff happening in August. Okay, number two, a question that I get a lot is, so hey, the Dirty Dirty Con Game Show is no more, and that is correct. So what's your pal Dana up to? And as I spoke of several episodes ago, we are still pals. We do still talk. Everything is very cool. And Dana is involved. One of the many things that she's involved with is a podcast called Dark Ages. Now, this is not a podcast like what you're listening to right now. This is a podcast, one of the fictional storytelling type like it's like a radio play. And when she was describing it to me, I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. But then I actually went and listened to it, and it's awesome. So here is, I sent Dana a message, and I said, hey, I would love to put over the podcast. I would love to put over Dark Ages on the show. Just send me a thing. I didn't have any idea what it would be. So what I got is a list of bullet points, or talking points, as it says, for Dark Ages, which you guys absolutely are going to want to check out. It's so much fun. There are 3 episodes up now at darkageshow.com. Let me make sure that's correct. Yes, darkageshow.com. So here are the talking points that I was sent over from the Dark Ages crew. It is high fantasy. It is a workplace comedy. It is an hour long. It is a podcast. Better than it has any right to be. Locally sourced, farm-to-table voice actors. Free range. Fully sound designed by a professional sound guy. Don't use promo code listener because we don't sell anything. If you hate reading, you'll love this. You've tried Terry Pratchett. Now try Very Pratchett. So you can kind of get a sense of the deal here. But anyway, after listening to the first episode, it's very funny. It's very they create a world very, very well. You very quickly know the characters. Personally, I love Abraxas. He's the guy. He's the one that I wait for his every line. I thoroughly enjoy the performance. But this is a full cast of tremendously talented voice actors telling the story. It is a museum opening with a new exhibit, and obviously, though things don't go as planned, there is a great evil at large that you also get a very interesting look at, and a goblin army, which some of the biggest laughs I got were the portrayals of the goblin army and the way that their commanding officers speak to them. So anyway, darkageshow.com. They have 3 episodes up right now. They're about monthly. So it's also not like, man, I got to keep up with this thing every week. It's about once a month you get a new episode. So you very easily can slide it into your regular podcast listening. So there it is. Our pal Dana is one of the voices on there. Well, several of the voices on there, actually. So check it out. You'll love it. I guarantee you'll have a fun time listening. It was not what I expected. It was better. All right, so darkageshow.com. Please check it out. The other thing I want to talk about, speaking of the game show, is the Dirty Game Show. We're done with it. We accomplished what we wanted to. You can get that whole story several podcasts ago. We have a new game show, though. It is me, Sean, and Oz, who you know, and our amazing cast of volunteers and production assistants and people who just are absolute magic to make this thing happen. But it is called The Big Damn Game Show, and it's going to be Saturday night at Dragon Con, 10:30 in the Hyatt International South Ballroom. This is not an adults-only show, but it is a fun show. So don't worry about they're not going to show Hellboy's dick on the screen anymore. That's not. No, we're not. But we're going to have an amazingly fun time. It's just going to be dick-free. So there you go. Big Damn Game Show. There's a Facebook event right now. Please go check it out. Invite your friends. Say you're going to go. Say you're interested. Whatever it is you do with Facebook events at Dragon Con, because we never know exactly what we're going to be able to do. Although I will say right now, as you may have figured out from me mentioning the Kirk Thatcher panel, I do have my schedule. I was initially overbooked until I realized there are 2 panels that I just cannot do because they conflict with the game show. But I've got a lot going on, and I'm very, very excited about it. But I don't want to announce too much officially before Dragon Con themselves have published the schedule. So hopefully next week, when we start our proper run of episodes with the track directors, I'll be able to talk about my schedule a little bit more. And we've already recorded for Classics Tracks and talked about a couple of things, but I would imagine by next Friday the schedule will be up. So Big Damn Game Show. It's going to be awesome. We've got prizes. We've got all new games that are, I'm not going to say it's family friendly. Don't bring your 10-year-old or whatever, but we're heading for a PG-13. But it's still going to be tons of fun. Still going to use audience members, and there's still the opportunity to just hang out, have fun, and also for anybody that was there last year for the last for the last Dragon Con edition of the Dirty Con Game Show. I know it went long. We will not have that problem this year. We will be done in a timely manner. So there you go. Big damn game show. Please come out at Dragon Con Saturday night, 10:30. Okay, finally, the last bit of business I've got before we get to the amazing Kirk Thatcher. There is a documentary film in the process of being made, or of being finished, I guess, about me. Our pal, Jason C. Wilson, from the Stopper episode of the podcast, followed me around for a little over a year with a camera and filmed me talking about what I do, filmed me doing what I do. He was there for all of Dragon Con last year, and it's pretty amazing, and it's great. And you can go to YouTube and look for, well, if you go to my profile anywhere, you'll find, go to Phantom Troublemaker on Instagram, find Dave West on Facebook. You will find this trailer, but if you Google Troublemaker movie, you will probably find the trailer as well. It's from Duck's Paw Productions. Maybe that'll help your Google search. But please go watch this trailer, share it, give me feedback, let me know what you think about it. I'm very, very excited. I'm very, very proud. Wilson is amazing. He's an Emmy Award-winning documentarian. So I mean, this is not me with a GoPro talking to myself for 13 months straight. This is legit, you guys. It's very important to me, very special to me. So please go check out the trailer for Troublemaker, coming soon from Duck's Paw Productions. And actually, I lied. I've got one more thing that I'm very proud of. There is a G.I. Joe book that I contributed to. It's great. I will have copies of it at Dragon Con. Ask me. They'll be. I think they're $10. And it is very difficult for me to say this because it sounds like such a thing. But if you want a copy of the book, find me. I'll $10. You get a copy of the book, and if you want, I'll sign the book. That was very difficult to say because it sounds very egotistical to me. But I want to put it out there. Like, don't feel like I want to sign it, but that seems weird. I don't know if it's cool. It's fine. I'll do it if you want. If you don't want me to sign it, that's fine too. I don't want to ruin your pristine G.I. Joe book, which, by the way, is an excellent book containing essays from people that are far better known than I am. And it's a good read if you like the Needless Things podcast, where we sit and we talk about the good old days and reminisce and have nostalgia and stuff. That's what this book is. It's just focused on G.I. Joe. Lots of different perspectives, lots of different stories of G.I. Joe, the original toy line, Real American Hero, everything in between. It's awesome. It's a really, really good book. So, like, even if you don't like me, if you're a G.I. Joe fan, it's a great book. So you should get it anyway. All right. I think that's as much as I needed to put over. I hope that I didn't inundate you with too much stuff. But if I did, I apologize. But now you can sit back, relax, enjoy our pals, the Mystery Men, which, by the way, they still have their GoFundMe going to help out with their new album. So if you go to the mysterymenofsurf.com, you can find out more information about that. And if you haven't, for some reason, listened to this show before, then the band that you're about to hear are the Mystery Men. All right, well, then we'll go ahead and start then, because yes. I have to begin with a request from my mother.
Okay.
This relates.
I rarely get mom requests, so I'm really curious where this is going.
It's something that I have to ask you about, and as I just mentioned, they took me to see Jaws 3 in the theater, and my mom in the 80s took me to see pretty much everything. Like, me and my mom going to the movies was a big part of my childhood, and like, I got to see all the cool stuff in the theater. One of the movies that she took me to see was Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home.
Nice.
I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I get that from my mom. I love all eras of Trek, but I have a very specific memory of watching that movie.
Yeah.
And when Kirk and Spock get on the public transit,
yes.
There's a young man being incredibly obnoxious, playing music so loud that everyone on the bus is just appalled at what's going on. And Spock takes action. And when that happened, my mom laughed longer and harder than I think I ever remember her laughing. She loves that scene like as much as she loves Star Trek. I honestly think that would be in one of her top 5 scenes ever.
Oh, wow.
So, at her request, the first thing I want to ask you about is how in the world did all of that come about?
Sure. Well, I can give you the long version, but the quick version is, well, even the quick version is not that short. I had worked at ILM for about 2.5, 3 years by 1983. I started in 81, so 81, 82, and 83. And in late 83, I decided I was going to go back to college to learn about computer graphics because what became Pixar, well, I think even then it was called Pixar, was the ILM computer graphics department. And I saw that this is going to take over the business. I mean, you could just tell what they were doing there, and then even as simple as it was going to change the face of filmmaking, but particularly special effects. So I went back to UCLA, where I'd already gone for a year, and I decided to focus on animation and computer animation particularly. But they wouldn't let you touch a computer until you'd done an animation course. So I signed up for the animation class and made some great friends there. And I'd been there for, I think, 2 semesters. And our TA came by, the teacher's assistant, who was like the tech assistant too. He'd help you out in the computers and the animation stand and all that. And he said they're looking, Paramount Pictures is looking for an assistant for Leonard Nimoy, who's directing Star Trek 4. He'd already directed 3, and he wanted someone on 4 to be his right-hand guy who had a knowledge of special effects. And so they were going to the universities, and I just left ILM like 6 months earlier, 9 months earlier. And so they said, which, they knew. And so he said, well, I will, would you be interested? I said, yeah, absolutely. So he gave me the number, and I called or whatever. There was no email back then. So I called and met with Leonard, and long story short, at this point, got the job. So I started out as his assistant, and what was amazing was I was like tailor-made. There literally wasn't a job I was better suited for because they paid me nothing. I mean, the amount of money they wanted to pay and the amount of experience I had, I knew everybody in ILM on first-name basis. Like, I was friends with. When I started, there was only 100. There was less than 100 people there. So all the people, all the guys who ran it, Ken Ralston and Dennis Mirren, were all friends of mine. So Leonard hired me specifically because he felt on 3 that he was given the runaround between producers and effects people. He just didn't know that world at all. And so he wanted someone who could tell him, no, that's baloney. That's not true. You could do it another way. Or, nope, that's absolutely right. It should take that long. He just wanted someone who knew it on his team. And so I was literally, he paid me out of his salary. I was not a Paramount employee. Well, I guess I was, but I remember my income came out of his overall paycheck. And he wanted that way because he wanted my loyalty to be to him. And so it started with that. So they were on the second version of the script. Another version had been written and been kind of tossed, and they were just starting on the second version. So I started very early on. And Leonard and I became friends very quickly. He had a great sense of humor, and I just, I grew up loving Star Trek, and I wasn't like a goobery fan, but I was a fan. But I didn't wet my pants when I met him. I just thought, what a cool guy. And we just hit it off. Like, I always said he was like a favorite uncle.
Now, at that point, had you already kind of been around people in the business and had a little...
I'd worked on Gremlins. I'd worked on Return of the Jedi. I'd worked on Jedi for a year and a half. I'd worked on Gremlins, the first one. I worked on set on Star Trek 3. In fact, I'd met him. He didn't remember me, but I was...
Sure.
There was the dog, the Klingon dog, and the worms that come out of the coffin in Star Trek 3. I puppeteered those. I'd been on set for like 5 or 6 days. I was underneath Chris Lloyd's chair with the dog on my arm, puppeteering the dog.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
The lizard dog. Yeah, these are things I didn't even get credit for. So Yeah, I'd already been around the whole Star Wars cast, Carrie and Mark and Harrison and all those guys, and the cast of Grandma. I mean, I'd been around actors. I grew up in L.A., and so any kind of, and not that I was super cool, but I mean, I was very excited. I was a huge Star Wars fan. I kind of blew my mind that I was working on Star Wars, but I knew to be cool around the actors, and like everyone's different. Like Carrie was kind of fun to party with. Mark was really nice and sweet. He already had a baby boy. Actually, I'm now friends with on Facebook, I realized. But so, and Harrison kind of kept to himself. His sons were like 2 years younger than me. I was only 19 when I was doing Jedi, and I think his sons were like 15 and 17. So it was funny. His sons were on set, and they were like could have been friends from high school of mine. So he, I didn't really pal up that much with Harrison. But anyway, so I'd been around actors, and so I'd written the script, and they had this scene in the movie with a punk, and thought it was fun. And Leonard and Harv Bennett had me write stuff in the script, the sci-fi like gobbledygook that was mentioned like during when I just wrote like pages of tech talk. And one of the things I wrote, again, I'm not credited for, but the beginning, all the questions that Spock is getting thrown at him. Who said logic is the cement of our civilization to represent chaos using reason, another guide? Correct. That's I wrote all those questions. I then did the voice.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's my voice. They couldn't give me credit because they said my name would have been in the credits 4 times more than Leonard's. So I was like, that's fine. The punk was at least on camera. So yeah, I wrote those questions. So at this point, Leonard had given me a lot of leeway. And during production, he said, you know what, I want to reward you, but they won't let me make you an assistant or associate director or assistant director. So we're going to make you associate producer. I'm like, dude, that's great. Thank you so much. He goes, well, you're doing so much, and you've been such a big asset to the production that I want to repay you somehow. I didn't get a bump in salary, but I got a better credit, which was nice because assistant to Leonard Nimoy, I think people thought I would answer his mail.
Right.
And he had an assistant, a lovely gal named Ori Saron, who had been his assistant for years. And so I got the associate producer credit. So I was feeling a little, I don't know, not cocky, but confident that, he actually liked me. So when the script came out, pretty much the shooting script, there was this punk scene. And I'd been in a punk band. I'd had a kind of a short version of a mohawk and orange hair back in the day. I was like 23 or 24. I was like 23, I think, when we did the movie. So, like 3 or 4 years earlier, I'd gone through a punk phase and a little bit at the end of high school. So I said, hey, I want to play the punk on the bus. And he looked at me. I've told this story 100 times, but we would just get together every day and go over. This was pre-production. We weren't shooting yet. So we'd talk about things, and I'd go off and do whatever I needed to do and just kind of check in with him a few times. Sometimes we'd have meetings. Sometimes I'd go with him to meetings. Sometimes he'd send me off to a meeting for him because he didn't want to go and thought it was boring. So I was like the hand of the king. I was watching Game of Thrones. It's like he gave me so much. I was 23, man.
That's amazing to have that kind of like responsibility and input.
And that trust. The trust that's really what blew me away.
Yeah.
But that's how well we got along. I remember when he first interviewed me, he asked me about my taste in movies and my taste in we just talked about art and acting, and I think he just wanted to get a sensibility of my sensibilities. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I told him this. It was like a Tuesday, and I said, hey, I would like, and he looked at me. He's like, really? He just had this deep he kind of raised an eyebrow, very Spock way. Really? I'm like, yeah, I was in a punk band. I know I'll do the hair and the makeup. I know how to dress. And he's like, let me think about it. So I said, all right, I'm not going to bother him. So like a week went by, and I just business as usual, had his meetings, and I wasn't going to be that jerky kid who's like, what are you going to, let me tugging on his shirt. Can I do it? So again, it was like a week later, like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, something, at the end of the day, and I'm leaving his office. He would usually at the end of the day have a nice gin and tonic and just sit back, and we'd shoot the breeze and talk about the day. And so we'd done that, and I was basically heading off. It was like 5 or 6, going to go home. And I'm heading out the door of his office. He goes, oh, one more thing. I'm like, yeah? And he's like, you can do it. Like, wait, seriously? It's funny. Even now I'm getting goosebumps. I remember that moment. I'm like, wait, seriously? He's like, yeah. yeah, you got to show me what you want to do or how you're going to look. I'm like, oh, you will not be disappointed. So I went and did a sketch. I actually still have that. I found this sketch that I did of me as the punk and showed him that. And he's like, he kind of laughed. He's like, really, you're going to do that with your hair? I said, dude, I'm going to have bright orange hair, with shaved sides. It's like, all right. So I did it. And we had a costume and wardrobe makeup test. And so we did it actually on the bus, actually crossing the Golden Gate Bridge. We did it like 3 takes. The first take didn't work because he didn't pinch. I'm wearing a cheap leather jacket, and his pinch I couldn't feel through the jacket. So the first take, I'm kind of looking at him like, are you pinching me? I can't tell. So we did it again. I think that second take was the one we used. And the other funny thing is there was no music. I'm just bopping my head because I knew punk music, and I knew it wasn't a waltz. It was like da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
So I'm just bopping my head back and forth and pretending to chew gum. And holding up my head to the boombox. And so, yeah, we shot it. We went over the bus 2 or 3 times, and that was it. So, a lot of, like most movie things, you spend months and months, and it's over in 30 seconds to a minute. But that's how I got the part and the job as associate producer. So, I was associate producer, played the punk, wrote and sang the song, and also uncredited for, writing a bunch of dialogue that's just background dialogue, but the opening, the computer voice at the beginning of the movie is me too. So,
well, aside from just the fun and effectiveness of that scene, I think one of the most important things about it is, and it's very interesting to find out that you had the punk rock background, because so often in movies, it'll be something like Street Tough, and it's this really, unconvincing bad boy character that you're like
some actor who doesn't want to fuck up. Oh, excuse me, he doesn't want to.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
They don't want to mess up their hair, so they put they just kind of gel it up. Yeah, and I was like, oh man, I know what punk is. And then I wrote and sang that. Well, the song's a whole other story that came about because speaking of that, they not only don't cast punks, especially for a bit. Like if it's background, they'd probably get some street punks, but if it's a bit with the actors, they're always a little nervous. Mm-hmm. And so the song, the studio, so again, that was done, MOS, Met Out Song. So I was miming along to an invisible beat. So when the studio said, okay, we're going to put a song on there, they were like, well, we have, Paramount had a licensing deal with some rock bands, but they were like new age bands, like Duran Duran or
right, yeah.
Well, new wave music. I'm like, that's not punk. That's new wave.
Well, and that's what happens so much too. Is something like supposed to be really obnoxious to the straights on the bus, and then they play like Flock of Seagulls.
Right, exactly. And I'm like, no, this has got to be like Dead Kennedys, and they weren't going to go make a deal with the Dead Kennedys. So I said to Leonard, because I knew that he liked me. I said, hey, I can write a song, and I'll write and sing a song that's a punk song, and use it if you want, but I could do that in an afternoon. I mean, I used to write crummy punk songs that were kind of fun. Like I love the Sex Pistols, Dead Kennedys, and a band called the Toy Dolls, which were sort of the Toy Dolls and what are the names? The guy they sort of tongue-in-cheek punk. There was a sense of humor about it. Well, even the Ramones, I mean that sort of sarcasm and so. I read and wrote I Hate You. I wrote it in about 30 minutes, just saying what was punk distilled to its essence.
Yes.
We've been screwed over by society, and because of that, I hate you, meaning I hate kind of everything. And so it just was easy, like, I hate you, I berate you.
I hate everything you do.
Yeah. But some of the funny things in there, I eschew you, it was a joke from my buddies in college. I worked at the UCLA Bruin, which is the newspaper, and I was a cartoonist there with a couple other friends. And we used to just, revel in funny words, and one of the things was, I eschew you. So I got to put that in there. I just say, I eschew you, and I say, screw you, which was a great moment for the flip-off.
Yes.
And so it's kind of backwards engineered for like, all right, if you're running the scene and the song's playing, so what I did was I worked on it, and the music was, I wrote the lyrics and kind of whatever you call the melody, if it is a melody. And then the sound designer, Mark Mangini, who is an Oscar-winning sound designer, I'd done Gremlins with and done some Gremlin sounds. And so he played guitar. I'm like, dude, you got to play guitar. So the band, The Edge of Etiquette, as it's credited in the the movie is essentially he on guitar and another sound engineer on the drums and another guy on rhythm guitar. So we just put together a band. It's a guitar.
Wonderful.
Yeah. They were Aaron Glasscock, John Pospisil, Mark Mangini, and myself. That is Edge of Etiquette. And I just made up the name because the name came about. Sorry, see, I told you I could talk all day about it.
Oh, no, stuff. This is awesome, man. I love this.
It's good to get it recorded while I still remember it,
Right.
70 years, I'll be like, I worked on that. What was I saying?
Edge of Etiquette, how that came about.
Oh, yeah. So because I would go to these meetings, and I'm me, and I have almost no filter, and I was going either with Leonard or for Leonard. Like, I would go to meetings with the head of the studio. It wasn't just he and I. It was like a round table meeting with like 10 or 12 people, department heads. Mm-hmm. And Leonard just said, look, I just want to make sure. And, we're talking about sets. And Leonard's like, look, blah, blah, blah. I want the bird. We would talk about the design elements or whatever. Because he was an actor, and this was one of the things I really learned working with Leonard is, and it's kind of obvious, but when you experience it as opposed to, someone tells you it, it's very different. He's like, he was an actor, obviously, and he came from an emotional actor's kind of standpoint, even as a director. And he said, I remember this meeting we had, and it was very early on. He goes, I am the heart of this film. He said, I focus on the heart, not literally he's the heart, but like, I want to focus on the heart of this film. What is this movie about? What does this movie make you feel? Right. This is a movie about friends. This is a movie about friends refinding their friendship, because Spock is now kind of this, tabula rasa. He doesn't really know who he is. He said, that's the core of this movie. The plot is the fun stuff and what they're doing, but I want to focus on the heart of that. So I want you, Kirk, to focus on the detail stuff that as long as it supports what I'm trying to do, I trust you. Like, if it gets down to like what the Klingon's hair looks like or, what color the graphics should be, I trust you. And that's what was amazing. Again, looking back now, I don't know if I'd hire a 23-year-old to, I guess if he was talented, I don't think I was that amazing, but I'm going to
at that point in his career though, Leonard Nimoy, he had to have a feel for people. He had to have a feel for talent, for
and
you know what I mean?
And he didn't have to prove himself anymore. He didn't have to say, I have to make every decision. There was no ego in that respect. And he really just wanted to focus on what he knew best, which was the story and the relationships between these characters. He said that, and that's why I think this movie stands out for non-Trek fans. Star Trek 2 is a great science fiction story, and it's got a very Shakespearean kind of, to me, I thought it was so hammy, but I liked it. But this one is relatable as you and your friends. Like, anyone can see this movie and understand it. Oh, that's the friend who's the goofball. That's the friend who's really serious. That's, it's that core thing that I think why Trek has lasted so long. And when they did Next Generation, they brought back, they created new characters, but with this core family kind of vibe. And so that's what I wanted to focus on. So anyway, so I'd go to these meetings with Ralph Winter, who became a good friend, who was basically the producer. Harv Bennett was the creative writing producer, and Ralph was essentially the rubber meets the road producer, did all the money managing. With Harv, but Ralph was the guy. And so he and I would very often go to these meetings, and Harv and Leonard wouldn't, because it's just not their purview, or they just trusted us. And I would make these comments. I'd always make jokes, riff on things, do a pun, just like I do now. And so he called me. He said, "You are the edge of etiquette." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You just walk that line. You say stuff to the head of Don Steele and Sid Ganis, the people who are running the studio." He goes, "You say this stuff that no one else could get away with, but because you're Leonard's guy and essentially you have no power." I said, "Yeah, I'm like the court jester. It's the guy who can say anything. And were they going to fire me? I'm $400 a week, and it doesn't matter what I say, so I could say anything." So he nicknamed me the Edge of Etiquette. So I said, well, we have to name the punk band that because it's a good punk band name.
Oh, it's a tremendous punk band name. And it's funny you mentioned the Sex Pistols when you were talking about the stuff you were listening to, because when I discovered punk pre-internet, so I didn't have easy resources to find all the songs anybody had written. I didn't have, I couldn't immediately look up what songs were in what movies, who was in what bands, whatever. And I remember when I first kind of came across the Sex Pistols, I was like, oh, these must be the guys who did the song in Star Trek 4. It's got to be.
Yeah, and that was me. Well, so again, I mentioned the toy dolls, and the guy in the toy dolls sang like this.
Yeah.
Like, I've got asthma and I can't breathe. So I had that kind of. So I was kind of doing a split between him and Sid Vicious with that kind of fake, just what is the future?
Yeah.
Trying to be an angry Brit. Also another band, the Dickies. They were American, but really tongue-in-cheek. They did the song Stukas over Disneyland, and they covered the Banana Split song as a punk tune. And so to me, punk was fun. It wasn't, the anger part I thought was kind of funny because it was very toothless. It was like, I'm an angry punk, but basically, I beat pipes against rocks. I don't actually have any power. I think it was the powerlessness of punk that fueled the anger. It's like you just felt like, and that was in the song, the sins of being all the fathers being dumped on us, the son, the only choice we're given is how many megatons. That's how I felt growing up. It's like, well, we're all going to die in a nuclear blast. I mean, I grew up during the all the punks that generation, we grew up with the threat of nuclear annihilation, nuclear winter.
Yeah.
Always hanging over, duck and cover, all that stuff. Obviously we weren't the first generation. The baby boomers grew up with that too, but it really hit home in the late 60s to early, before the wall fell. It just seemed like, especially when Reagan was president, which is kind of when this, movie came out.
Oh, absolutely.
Exactly when this movie came out.
Yeah,
and there were movies like The Day After and all that. So,
well, the Cold War was, it's weird to think about it now and sort of the constant tension. But like back then, I remember like kind of every day you're kind of like, well, when's Russia going to attack us? Like that was just in the 80s, even as a kid, I kind of remember that being the tone.
Well, in the 60s and 70s when I grew up, it just was like a constant, like the monkey on your back. Like you just knew, I think it fueled punk and sort of the nihilism of it. Like why, they're YOLO, man. Like we're going to die tomorrow. So let's have fun. We're not going to be rich. We're just going to have whatever, I was not into drugs at all, but there were, kids huffing paint and sniffing glue because it was a cheap high. And it was like, why worry about my brain when I'm in my 40s when I'm not going to make it? I think people made bad decisions because of it. I never, I always knew it was there, but I always thought, well, I'm not going to, just in case we don't blow ourselves up.
Right.
To be conscious and all well into my hundreds. So, and that's the other side of sci-fi. In fact, that's the movie. It's sort of showing how desperate times were, judging by the pollution content in the atmosphere. I'd say we were the latter half. And the threat of extinction by our own hand, by, not by nuclear war, but by wiping out species, which is, the story still holds up. It's even more prescient now with global warming and the, what are they calling the Anthropocene, where it's the next major extinction event and we're causing it.
Yes.
All those concepts were either, I wouldn't say they're prescient because it was just as valid, but it's not gone away. In other words, we haven't fixed any of those problems.
Well, and what's so important about that kind of stuff showing up in pop culture and science fiction and our media is the kids do see it, and yes, it's a message, and and once you get to a certain age, it's recognizable as such. But for me, I know all that stuff that I took in when I was a kid, it penetrated, it got into me, and I feel these things that, it's a smart way of saying, look, we can be socially responsible and we can have fun and be creative too. Yeah. Well,
it's funny, the last Trek anecdote just happened a couple of years ago, saying it, you remember it. I was at Comic-Con with a buddy of mine who works with the Marvel people, and was at a party where Kevin Feige was, and he introduced me. My friend introduced me as, this is Kirk Thatcher, and Kevin Feige looked at me, and he said, "Kirk Thatcher?" I'm like, from Star Trek 4? I'm like, yeah. And he came up and he shakes my hand dead serious, like, you're the reason I got into film business. I'm like, what? I thought my buddy was punking me, so I kept looking at my friend like, I'm laughing going, wait, what? Seriously? And he's like, yeah, I was 13 years old, and I saw that movie, and you were the punk, and you wrote the song, and you were associate producer, and I said to myself, I want to do that. I want to work in a business where I can do all those things and have fun and work on Star Trek movies. And he said, yeah, you're one of the reasons I was like inspired to work in films. I'm like, holy cow, that's amazing. So, I mean, that was a nice payoff because it's turned into a relationship with Marvel that hasn't turned into anything I can talk about yet, but it may. So.
Oh, that's fantastic, man.
Yeah, but that's funny. So who knew that something that long ago when he was, I mean, I was only 10 years older than he was. But it affected him, you know, and they did a Star Trek poll about 2 years ago. It was an online thing. What are the most memorable moments or the fan favorite moments? And the Punk on the Bus was number 3, I think. So it even was popular. I remember when the movie screened in Russia in 1985, 86, I guess it came out, 86, 87, 86. I think
I want to say 86.
Yeah, I think it was 86. So they had a screening in Russia, and Leonard went over there for the screening. And he came back, and we were talking about it. I said, you know, how'd it go? He said, well, the biggest laugh in the whole movie is the Punk on the Bus scene. He goes, because punks had just started becoming an issue in Russia.
Oh, that's funny.
Talk about a place where punk was really valid. Like, geez, you know, we're going to go starve to death. There wasn't even nuclear annihilation. It's like, you know, the wheat's dying. And so he said, yeah, the Russian audience just loved that moment because they all wanted to shut the punks up on the bus too. So no, that was funny.
Well, anyway. And that's huge too because I mean there's some strong comedy in that movie. So that's a solid claim to be able to make. Well, let's any country that loves Russ Meyer films as much as they do. I heard that he's the Jerry Lewis of Russia. Like to them, Russ Myers is a director of a filmmaker of the people. And, like, they revere him the way the French revere Jerry Lewis. Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Not great. Yeah. Well, you look at it, he is, especially of that era.
Yeah, right. Well, let's go further back now, because now that the question has been answered, Mom, I hope you enjoyed that.
That was an extensive answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's fantastic. So you said you grew up in L.A.?
Mm-hmm.
Where being surrounded by the industry, I assume had an impact on your decision to be part of it.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh, well, what drove you to get involved, or how did you get involved? I'm always very interested to know, like, if you recognize the point at which you were like, well, this is it. This is what I'm doing with my life.
Yeah. I was a kid. I'm pretty sure I was on the spectrum to some degree. I think all artists are. I mean, you have to be to focus that much on stuff that, you know, has no immediate payoff. But I like to read and I like to draw. And I loved fantasy films. So growing up, I saw the Ray Harryhausen and pictures on TV because they'd already been released in the theaters, most of them. So the big influence was King Kong, Bride of Frankenstein, and Jason and the Argonauts, all which I saw on television, along with like The Wizard of Oz and stuff. This was pre-Star Wars. And Star Trek I loved as a series and Lost in Space and that stuff. But the big influences were Kong, Bride of Frankenstein, and Jason and the Argonauts. When Talos, the giant metal statue, comes alive, and the Hydra, just that, I was like, I want to do that. So between that and I'd heard about Imagineers who made the Disneyland rides. Like, I wanted Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion probably when I was 6 or 8, and just, you know, I'm like, that's amazing. So no one in my family, there were no artists in my family. I had one cousin who threw pottery at Berkeley, and that was the artist in the family.
Let me divert you real quick, because something just occurred to me, and you mentioned being 6 or 8 and going through Pirates, going through the Haunted Mansion. What is it that makes the animatronics in there so much cooler than if it was people in there?
It's funny you said that, because I always thought, man, I wonder if it would have been cheaper if they just hired actors. Particularly the Pirates. I mean, Haunted Mansion, you know, there's ghost gags and stuff, but Pirates of the Caribbean, if, like, you took the figures out and actually had actors running around and jumping and just paid them, you know, $20 an hour, like, would it be cheaper in the long run? And then every trip would be different. I think that's part of the magic. It's like part of the appeal of the Muppets is that they're fake in the back of your head, or even stop motion films like the Wes Anderson one, I Love Dogs, or the Ray Harryhausen. There's something that makes it cooler because it's not real. And I don't know. It's like seeing a puppet show. I mean, if you just applied logic to it, you're seeing a guy's hands with socks on it talking to each other. Like, why is that more intriguing than actors or a cell cartoon? There's something about the reality of that thing, knowing it's a robot, and the style. It's stylized to some degree. I mean, pirates, they're caricatured; they're not like Muppet stylized. But I think there's something in the back of our head that goes, "This is cool." The same way we think. Automata are cool when you see when you see some of those amazing figures that have been made, some 150 years ago where they wind it up and it plays cards or does a magic trick.
Yeah. There's something about the simulation of life.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is it because we know somewhere inside like that's man-made, but we've created this almost living thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's an intrigue of knowing it's a robot, and even though it doesn't really do that much. I mean, look at pirates; they either just stand there or sit there and kind of wave an arm,
swivel at the waist, and move their arms.
Yeah, but there's something about that tableau, a simulation of reality, or a simulation of a reality that doesn't exist anymore. But that 360-degree immersion too, I think. Those two rides put you in an environment where they spared no expense to have every detail, cobwebs and dust and fire and water and ships and there's some joy of that as you really are transported to another world, even more so than really good virtual reality. I just did the Shadows of the Empire. I forget what it's called, something in the Empire, or the virtual reality where you put on a headset and you've got a gun and you're a stormtrooper essentially, or you're a rebel.
Right.
And it's amazing. It's really great. I had a blast. But it's way more interactive than Pirates. I mean, you're running around and you're going into rooms and there's no lag, and the graphics are, I mean, you just think in 10 years it'll be just like being there, except you won't be there. And that's the thing, is like, if they actually built a space station that you ran around in a stormtrooper or a rebel outfit, and you had a gun that shot, fake or lower level lasers, like that would still be better than VR, although probably way more expensive and insurance wouldn't cover it. But
that's the difference, is that tactile, because when you're in Pirates, even though you're not interacting, you feel that breeze, you feel the humidity in the air, like you're there.
And it's something about the Muppets too, having worked with them for so long, is, people have said, are they going to start doing Muppet movies in CG? I said, I don't think it would work. No. Because then you feel like, well, why do they look so dumpy? I mean, if you could do CG, you can make them look like Pixar characters. I mean, Pixar made a Muppet movie. It's called Monsters, Inc. All those monsters are basically Muppets. But the joy of it is knowing they're in the real world, and the illusion, the suspension of disbelief. Is kind of the fun of it. The same thing with Pirates. I think any of those figures. I mean, America Sings was cool. I don't know how many people have seen it. I think it only lasted in the park about 10 or 12 years. But it was all these animated, they were like Pixar characters now, animals singing classic Americana type songs from like the 1820s to about the 1970s. There was 5 different rooms, and each covered like a 20-year era. Incredibly fun. It was like real cartoon characters, but they come alive. And now we kind of do that with, especially 3D CG movies now, the animated films that Pixar does, or Illumination, and you watch it in 3D. It's like pretty cool. They seem really there. So yeah, I think that's a big part of the appeal for Pirates and the Muppets, tying into something that I worked with a lot. That back of your head, kind of knowing that it's not real, and that's the fun of it.
Yeah, that's it. Well, it's just when you mentioned those, it interested me, because one of my earliest sort of magical experiences at the Six Flags Over Georgia theme park that we have here, there's a ride called the Monster Plantation,
No, right. I've seen pictures of the characters from it.
Oh my gosh, it's just to this day I love it.
Right, it's like Monsters Inc. kind of character.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a dark ride. It's through the water.
Yeah.
And
it's got a lot of whimsy to it. It's not
Yes.
scary. It's whimsical. Yeah, I love that.
And it was, when I was a kid, just being in that, I same thing with the Muppets. I think it's the idea of, look at these amazing characters that somebody has figured out how to bring to life. And with the Muppets, it's an ongoing act where you're sitting there, you lose yourself because Kermit moves so damn well. You're not thinking about a guy manipulating Kermit. It's just Kermit. And then when it's over, you're like, whoa, that was just tons and tons of people moving these puppets around. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and back to your original question about what got me into all this. So between those rides and those movies, I was like, I want to make... So I love science and biology. That was my first kind of fascination. My mom reminded me I just would read science encyclopedias, and to her, either credit or fault, she said, well, you should try fiction. I'm like, I'm more interested in the real thing. She said, well, there's science fiction. We joke about it now that she rues the day she introduced me to science fiction, because then I became completely absorbed in that, and since my love for, and then it was like, oh, so I can imagine creatures and spaceships and anti-gravity. I don't have to actually go and learn math to make it happen. So at some point, probably between 5 and 7, or 7 or 8, I read a lot. I was an advanced reader for a kid, and so I remember my birthday present was to go to the library and check out 20 books, because with one card you could only check out 10. So my mom would check out 10 and I would check out 10, and they covered everything from science and biology and books on animals to just science fiction and a lot of science fiction and art books. So all that kind of being said, I was like, well, I want to either do, by the time I was 10, I knew I either wanted to make movies with monsters or creatures or something like that, either funny or scary, or work at Disney and design theme parks. Because I would do that on my free time. I'd just sit and draw monsters or creatures, or design like theme park rides, like this would happen and then you do this. And then with my brother, we would make haunted houses for our friends. Just this is how little we were. We had a pool table, so we would take pillows, and we had these long cushions that were on this bench in our family room, and we'd make walls, and we'd have these haunted houses that our friends, you could crawl through under the pool table. Again, that's how tiny we were. We could crawl under the pool table. And, I had little skeletons, and we'd make sound effects or run records and just kind of do this all the time. Like, let's make a haunted house. And it was just these little spook rides that we did for each other. It wasn't Halloween or anything.
That's
great.
So
that was my, I do that, and comedy radio plays with a tape recorder. And it's funny because, I was reading about Martin Short and Jimmy Fallon. Like, we all did this. It was a thing that you do. You just get your recording and make radio plays, just with jokes and songs. And
I used to do that. I would be a disc jockey, though.
Yeah.
I would put like 3 songs together from my dad's record collection, and I had my little cassette recorder. So I would literally put a record on and just sit there and record 3 songs, and then I would sit there and talk and tell jokes, or probably repeat Steve Martin jokes or whatever.
And look, now you have a radio show that's now called a podcast.
Exactly.
Well, it was the same thing. So, but I would do comedy shows. Because I love Python, Monty Python. I love Steve Martin. I loved any kind of comedy. So between creatures and comedy, and I ended up on the Muppets. What a surprise. And then Star Wars came out, and I knew it was coming out because I was reading, there was a magazine that came out every couple months called Cinefantastique.
Yes.
It would cover the world of fantasy and science fiction films, and there was a little blurb about the Star Wars, and then I bought the paperback. I saw literally like in a drugstore about 6 months earlier, so it came out in May. I saw it probably January, February. There was a paperback with the Ralph McQuarrie painting, and it said the Star Wars. And so I bought that and read it and got so excited and realizing this is a movie. And I mean, the cantina scene alone, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to see this movie. So I got to see it. My mom let me out of school because I was literally losing my mind. I got to see it opening day at Man's Chinese, a 12 o'clock noon show with 2 friends from school. We ditched school and went and saw it. So I was 15. And then it sealed the deal. Like, I want to make special effects. I want to do that. I want to make those kind of movies. And I didn't have anyone in the business. No one was, like I said, no artist. So what helped me make that decision was, like you said, I grew up in LA. So I grew up in Van Nuys. So there were a lot of people who worked in the industry, but they weren't writers, directors, producers. They were like my next door neighbor, like my best friends growing up. It was 3 boys between we literally went every year, the oldest and then the second oldest. So there were those 3. And then me and my brother were all like a year and a half apart. So we were just 5 boys within like a 6-7 year range. And so we made our own little film company. We made Super 8 movies together. And their dad worked in the film business. He was a composer and also had a post-production facility where they do sound and editing and music and kind of do whatever kind of post was needed for like smaller budget movies, what we call B movies now. And so he had a job in it, and I knew that, like, okay, you can make a living working in it. And I would ask him questions, and we'd go. He had a moviola in his back studio. We'd play with a moviola and, loop together mag tracks to make sound effects, and just kind of grew up around it, not thinking it was, this unattainable thing. And again, we'd ride our bikes to his office in Burbank and just goof around in his studio with the moviolas and the editing equipment, just because, it was film. And they had tons of stuff they used for audio leader, because audio was on 35 mag stripe. So it was magnetic media tape, but it was on a 35 millimeter film strip. So you could run it with the moviola and slide it back and forth and sync up your sound back then. So what they use is old 35 millimeter footage for blanks, like when you needed a gap. There was all this old movie footage laying around, and just I don't know where they got it, but they just called it leader. And so we had movie footage and audio track to play with, and just kind of learned the mechanics of it by osmosis. No one ever sat us down and taught. I mean, the oldest son showed us how to work the moviola, but you really couldn't break those things. They were cast iron. They were kind of indestructible.
That's such a good way to learn, man. I
just
love the sitting down and like, all right, we're going to figure this out now.
Yeah. And just mucking about with it and playing. There's no wrong. You couldn't really break it. It's not like digital stuff now where you could, like wipe the hard drive by pushing a couple wrong buttons. So that gave me the confidence to know you could make a living in this business. And then just kind of either the stubbornness of being on the spectrum and being absorbed in something where I didn't go on dates. I didn't go out. I didn't even drive. Learned to drive till I was 18 because there was nowhere I wanted to go. I wanted to sit in my room and draw or watch. I didn't have VHS tapes then, so watch TV or draw or read or paint or some sculpt, make model kits. I wasn't super. I had my best friends and a couple of friends a few friends at school, and I wasn't a loner. I just liked to do stuff that usually I couldn't rope any of my friends into.
Yeah. You learned to be okay doing your own thing.
Well, you're just so focused on it. I mean, like I said, I think art is somewhere on the spectrum because you sit there for hours focusing on something that has no real worldly value. You're not like, obviously it does if you're going to sell it, but when you're a kid, no one's buying your drawings. No one's saying, hey, sculpt this monster for me. I'll give you $100.
Yeah.
So you're just focusing on it because it's fun and it's cool and you want to get better at it. And that paid off in the end is that I was very fortunate in that I met Joe Johnston, who was the production designer for ILM. ILM, that was another lucky break. I grew up about 2 miles from where ILM was for Star Wars. It was in Van Nuys, right near Van Nuys Airport. And I literally think I was less than 2 miles away. I could ride my bike to where it was. But nobody knew that until my mom came home from church one day and said, hey, I met a woman whose son worked on Star Wars. I said, "What? Okay, well, that's cool. What's his name?" Joe Johnston. I'm like, wait, Joe Johnston? I already had his sketchbook. So this was the summer of '77. So Star Wars had been out for 2 or 3 months. And I was like, are you kidding me? Joe Johnston? He's designed all the spaceships and helped design them and storyboarded. Like, he's got sketchbooks out. And so I met Joe, who was incredibly nice. And he's about 10 or 11 years older than me. So, I was 15 and he was like 26, 27. And he had they were working on Galactica, but he gave me a tour of ILM, and I said, dude, I didn't call him dude, but I was like, I showed him all my drawings and the models I'd been scratch building or building, and I said, I want to work at ILM. And I said, I know I'm too young. And he said, well, keep doing what you're doing, like keep building models and drawing and, learn perspective and blah, 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 learn how to storyboard. And in other words, just keep doing what you're at, and, we'll keep in touch. So I would talk to him once or twice a year. Again, there was no email or cell phones. I would just call him and say, hey, and talk to him and try not to bother him, but just keep that contact going. And he was very nice. We shared a goofy sense of humor. And so I graduated high school and went with some buddies, the same buddies I grew up with. I told you that, the three friends. We got in 2 cars and drove up. We went camping in Yosemite, and then we went to San Francisco, and I called Joe up and I said, hey, I've got like 5 buddies, my brother and 3 other friends, and we're going to be in the Bay Area. Could we get a tour of ILM? Because now they'd moved up to Marin County. And he said, sure, yeah. So we figured out we could visit him on a Saturday when it was closed. So we went to ILM and got the 2-3 hour tour and just walked around and asked a bunch of questions. And again, Joe was very gracious. And I was kind of like, dude, I got to work here. And he said, well, keep in touch and keep working on your art. I said, all right. So I started, I gave them this creature I'd made for a friend's movie. I'd made this latex kind of troll demon creature for a friend of mine's Super 8 movie, and which never got finished, but we had some cool shots. But anyway, I had this weird, imagine like sort of a Jabba, kind of big fat creature with little horns, and he had glass eyes and a big fat belly. And so it was just the head and the kind of the to the belly button. And he was in the movie, he just sat behind a big desk. It was sort of being judged in hell. And so I gave it to him. I said, hey, I brought this. I wanted to show it like my portfolio piece. He's like, oh, it's great.
Yeah.
We'll stick it in the creature shop. I'm like, cool. I'd have at it. So I gave him that and then went to UCLA for a quarter, started in the fall. And at the end of that, which was like January, I realized that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't touch a camera. I couldn't make any movies for like another 2 or 3 years. And I've been making movies on my own since I was 12. So I was frustrated. So I called him. I said, hey, I knew you guys, and the press was they were starting on the 3rd Star Wars movie. And I said, hey, I called him up. This was sometime in January, late January, I guess. I said, hey, I know you're working on the new Star Wars film. Can I come up and like intern? I will make coffee. I'll sweep the floors. I'll mix plaster or whatever. And it was funny. And this is one of those moments in your life where you're like, huh. He said, who have you been talking to? I said, what? What do you mean? He said, who told you? I said, who told me what? He said, I just put your name on a list literally yesterday for people they should interview because George wants a creature shop here in Marin County because he doesn't like it all being done in England where he can't, again, this is before the internet, where he can't see anything for months or he has to fly back and forth. I'm like, you're kidding. He goes, no, nobody told you? I said, seriously, dude, I just finished my first semester at UCLA and I'm like, I'd rather go work on a real movie than, and he I think he was a bit incredulous, like, seriously, nobody told us? I know nobody up there. I literally, he was the only, I said, you're the only guy I know. He's all right. So I got all excited and went and I think my folks drove up with me and had an interview. No, I might have just driven up by myself. I had a car at that point I could drive. And had an interview with Tom Smith, who had just taken over from Jim Bloom. And I met Chris Wallace and Ken Ralston. And at that point, Chris was going to co-run the creature shop with Phil Tippett. And I interviewed, and I remember it was very funny. They gave me a tour again, and I showed them my creature. And so they knew I knew how to do the basic things. I could sculpt, I could mold, I could cast, I could paint. I knew how to run foam. And they took me out to lunch, and both of them just railed on me like, you're an idiot. I'm like, what? And they're like, you want to work here? Your parents would pay for a UCLA education? And this is exactly what my parents have been telling me. Like, you want to work? Well, they told me a week later. I'm like, yeah, I want to work on Star Wars. Like, it's just a stupid job. It's a dumb movie. You get a degree. I'm like, yeah, but it's Star Wars. And they're like, you can't believe you're that stupid. I'm like, what? No, come on, you guys. Like, seriously? They're like, yeah, you're an idiot. And I don't know if they were like, I mean, I asked them years later, and they said, no, we thought you were an idiot. You're trying to just see if I really wanted to do it? Like, no, we thought you were an idiot. Like, okay, cool. So I went home, and so anyway, that was it. And then I got back, and about a week, 2 weeks later, I got a call saying, hey, we'd like to hire you for the grand total of $400 a month was or $400 a week was my salary for like 6 years, which wasn't much then. It was impossible now, but yeah. So I kind of threw a rod and got super excited. And my parents said basically what Ken and Chris were saying, you're going to throw away a college degree to go play with, as my mom put it, you're going to throw away a college degree to go play with spaceships and rubber monsters. I'm like, yes, I am.
Man, I got to tell you, I mean, to me, that sounds perfect.
I know. Well, it wasn't like Star Wars it wasn't like the first Star Wars where nobody knew what it was. I mean, I was like, come on, this is a phenomenon. But my parents, again, not in the film business. They knew people in the film business because they both grown up in L.A., but they knew enough to know that it wasn't, a dreamy, it was a tough business, and there's a lot of shady characters in it. Anyway, so I, in my callow youth won over, and I would not be, really, you couldn't have dissuaded me. I remember my girlfriend at the time was like, you're going to leave me? And go, I'm like, yes, yep. Like, yep, I'm going to leave you and go work on Star Wars. If you want to come up, fine. But if not, I'm going to go there. And so I did. I went and I started working on the creature shop. My first week was painting the building from the inside. I said I'd sweep floors and I never had to make coffee, but I did sweep floors and paint the interior. Now, remember, it was a industrial space, so it was like 24-foot ceilings. So they gave me an airless. I was by myself. I was the first person hired who wasn't already an employee there, and painted the inside of the building on a scissor lift. And I was terrified of heights, so it already tested my. But I was like, nope, I'm not going to screw this up. I remember the first time I went up on the scissor lift, and my head's about 24 feet in the air on a scissor lift, which isn't that shaky, but it's not, it's not a cement building.
Yeah, it's still not the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And so my hand is holding the rail, and I'm spraying with an airless sprayer, which you can't really do wrong. But I remember it was shaking. The whole thing was like, so I got over my fear of heights pretty fast. And then, worked on Jedi for like a year and a half, got to go on all the locations. I was going to go to England to do support of the creatures, but I got sick. I got urethane poisoning and mono and was out of commission for like 2 weeks. I had a terrible fever and was hallucinating. And so I didn't go to London because I was too ill. But then pretty much as soon as they went to, I went to Yuma, Arizona for, like 2 months. It was a long shoot. And then maybe about the same 6 weeks in Brookings, Oregon. So I did all the Java's exterior barge stuff and all the Ewok stuff in the forest, and then pickups and blue screen stuff at ILM. And so, for your first project, it was pretty amazing. And then stayed at ILM kind of off and on, and made a very good friend there, David Fincher, who's gone on to have a nice career.
One of my favorite directors.
Well, he and I were the two youngest guys at ILM. We jokingly called each other Babe. We would page each other, Baby Dave, call it Baby Kirk Gun. Because, we were both still teenagers. Technically, we were both 19. Dave might have been 18. He was 5 months younger than I am, so he might have still been an 18-year-old. But anyway, I did Star Trek 2 and 3, and then Gremlins 1 with Chris Wallace. So Chris left the creature shop to start his own shop, and I helped him out on a couple things. Then he got Gremlins. So I worked on Gremlins for about 4 or 5 months. I designed their paint job and their eyes. I designed Chris had kind of done the overall, obviously, design work. Tony McVeigh sculpted it, but then I did 3 or 4 different paint treatments, and they picked one of them, which was the kind of dark green brown with the flesh-colored stripes and the kind of cockroach kind of colors on the back. So I designed that and then set up the mold shop and realized I didn't want to be a mold maker for the rest of my life, and Chris needed me to do that because none of the other guys had done it really. And I just didn't want to do it. So I left Gremlins and did about 6 months of rock videos with Dave Fincher. We'd formed our own little production company with my girlfriend at the time, became a producer, and we did Rick Springfield's Bop to You Drop, and which has a monster in it, which is me. I designed it and wore the costume and I was production designer on the video. And then we did some whole, what is it called? Beat of the Live Drum, I think. Like, it was a concept album of rock videos. And I did that as production designer, and then did a couple of Motels videos with David. And then moved to LA and started back at UCLA, and then went into Star Trek, as I told you. So I covered a lot of ground in the first 6 years of my career.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, about the music videos, I mean, back then...
They were a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge proving ground for a lot of directors that we know now. And plus, at the time, now music videos are, I don't even know what's going on with them now because I'm getting old and don't care about pop music. But back then, I mean, they were events. An artist would put out a new video, and Entertainment Tonight would talk about when it was going to premiere on MTV, and there would be big interviews. And, the record companies were paying for these big, lavish videos.
Yeah.
What was the process like? To what extent?
Yeah. Well, Rick Springfield found us. David had done a public service video about it was a smoking fetus, and it was an image of a fetus, and as the camera came around, you realize it took a puff on a cigarette and blew out.
Oh my gosh, I remember that.
Yeah, so my buddy Tony McVeigh, who worked at the Creature Shop and on Jedi, he sculpted a bunch of the designed Salacious Crumb and did a bunch of characters. He sculpted the fetus, and Dave shot it and directed it, and so they'd gotten some attention. And so Rick Springfield knew there were these guys the young guys at ILM were ready to do stuff. And so his agency or whatever found us through David, and we pitched this idea for Bop Till You Drop, and I did design the creatures and kind of the sets, and Dave pitched the story, and we shot it in 3 days in the summer in a abandoned or it wasn't abandoned, but it was decommissioned like steel mill from World War II. It's just a metal building, like a giant metal shed the size of a supermarket or a department store. It was like 40-foot ceilings, but it was just all metal. And we turned it into all the sets and kind of spent a long 2 weeks building it, and then shot it in 3 days. And then after that, because it got a lot of attention because there was all these special effects, and I remember they're saying, the guys from ILM, from Lucasfilm, had done this on the side, which was true. And then we got, Rick liked working with us, and he was fun and easy to work with, so we did the whole concept album, Beat of the Live Drum. I think we did like 4 or 5 other videos. And I had a couple cameos in those too as a clown in one. I'm talking about Nuclear Annihilation. Can't remember the name of the song, but it was about it's Rick in kind of a dystopian world of garbage and smoking debris where it's like the world's been blown up, and then there was a Mr. Rogers kind of show where he's Mr. Rick and the clown is bringing out planes and talking about nuclear radiation, and there was a one-eyed mutant puppet, and so it was kind of dark, and again playing with those same themes of like, are we going to blow ourselves up?
So when you, having done a little bit of acting and whatnot, like whenever you first decided to get on camera for something, were there any thoughts of like, oh, I hope this is a thing I can do, or was it just like, nope, I'm doing this, whatever?
Well, in the video, I'd done theater, musical theater in high school and junior high, so I was not shy. I was a shy kid until the teacher said, I was a class clown, like an introverted extrovert.
Yeah.
If I wasn't on the spot, I'd do and say anything, but if someone goes, hey, do that thing, suddenly I'd freeze.
Yeah.
So he put me in a school play, and then in my senior year, at ninth grade, I was the lead in a play, a musical. It was How to Succeed in Business. And so then I lost any sense of fear. I had so much fun doing it, because to me it's just playing. It's like, you're just playing with your friends and being goofy, and if you like the role. So yeah, I mean the cameos in the rock videos were just, no one else would be dumb enough to do this. It wasn't glamorous. It was, who wants to put on this clown makeup and dance around like an idiot? I'll do it. Because basically we're not going to hire an actor. Same thing with the creature and Bop Till You Drop is like, well, I'm here. I've got a life cast in my head. We can build it around me, and I'll be encased in fiberglass and latex and wear full scleral contact lenses 14 feet in the air in the middle of a heat wave. it was, I think I sweated out about 14 pounds on that shoot. So yeah, it was like, you really couldn't ask anyone else to do it because they'd be like, screw you, I'm not doing it.
Right.
I eschew you, I say screw you. That's a callback. So anyway, yeah, that was, it wasn't, I enjoy acting, but I hate auditioning. It's just demoralizing. So I always, people want to put me in stuff. Pretty much any little part I've been given is because, like the Spider-Man cameo was because Kevin Feige was a Star Trek 4 fan, so he made me punk on the street. He
right.
We were having a meeting about this project I'm talking about with them, and in the middle of it, he had to leave, and he had to say, I'm going to New York. I'm like, oh, I'm going to New York too. He said, when? I said, well, Friday. He said, hey, if you can be there Friday morning, we'll stick you in Spider-Man. I'm like, seriously? He goes, yeah, you can. Well, you can be the punk. I'm like, what? He's like, well, we'll figure it out. So next day I get a call from the producer like, hey, we're doing Spider-Man. If you can be there Friday morning at like 4 a.m, we'll stick you in the movie. As we came up with a little part you can just kind of wedge yourself in on. So that's how I got that one-line cameo. It's because Kevin Feige, but I've made $380 in residual payments. Seriously, I got my second check. It was like $120, and the first one was like $260 or something. So it wasn't a big payout, but it was fun, and it was nice that Kevin even wanted to put me in it. But anyway, where was I going with
Catching
that?
up to Star Trek 4.
Yes. So, so did the videos with Dave, did a bunch of Rick Springfield, then did Martha Davis in the Motels, a couple videos for them, and that's when I was at UCLA, and then I met Leonard and did Star Trek 4, which takes us about to 86 when it came out. And then I met Jim Henson, a special effects producer. I became friendly with her husband, had directed, it was Jim Frawley, who directed the original Muppet movie, and I'd showed her some designs and stuff. I'd been working with her. She was a headhunter for Omnibus Able. They were trying to get gigs, and they contacted us for Star Trek 4, but they didn't work out. We had an exclusive with ILM, but she and I became friends, and I was showing her some designs I'd done, and she said, who would love this stuff, and you should meet is Jim Henson. And I'm like, I'd love to meet Jim Henson. You'd already done Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, I think it had just come out. So I met Jim, and there's a whole other podcast. But anyway, we hit it off.
And I think what we'll do is get a little bit into Henson here, and then consider Dragon Con our part 2.
Here you go.
Since that will be for the Puppetry Track at Dragon Con, we can consider that sort of a part 2 of this episode.
Awesome. That sounds great. So I met Jim Henson, and I pitched him some ideas, and he was staying at the Bel Air Hotel. So we had lunch, and I went back to his room with his assistant and sat on the floor, and I showed him my portfolio and these creature designs I'd done. And we hit it off, and he called me 2 weeks later or a week later and said, hey, do you want to come work with me? I'm like, yeah, I would love to. And it started a beautiful friendship, working relationship. Originally started just working freelance out of my house in L.A. With him and flying out to New York a few times. And then I moved to New York in early 88. So I had about a year and a half of just freelancing on 2 projects, and then moved to New York to work on the Jim Henson Hour with him, and spent half the time in Toronto, half the time in New York. And originally I was just an idea guy. I would do drawings and come up with ideas and brainstorm with Jim, sort of creative riffing with him, which was like the best job in the world. And that was my responsibilities, was show up, be creative, and, be Jim's idea guy. So that was great. And we did that. And then after the Jim Henson Hour, I moved back to L.A. because I didn't want to. Jim was like, oh, no, you'll stay here and I'll just keep you on the payroll. I'm like, I don't want to take your money just to exist. Because I felt he was like a friend, not just a boss. So I said, I'll move back to L.A. and then we'll just do what we did before. We'll work on things as they happen. And so moved back to L.A. and worked on RoboCop 2 for about 6 months with Phil Tippett. I lived up.
Man.
Yeah, I designed a couple things. The tank where the brain and the eyeballs and the spine are kept. There's like a long tube cylinder with like bubbles on it, and what's left of Kane is in there before they put him in the Kane robot. And then in the end, when he pulls his brain out in that little contraption that holds his brain, I built that and made it a breakaway. So I designed and built some stuff for RoboCop 2, working with Phil Tippett. And so then that happened, and then I got a job at Imagineering. This is all my first 10 years. I had a good first 10 years.
This is tremendous.
Yeah, I know. Even I'm like, wow, I got around. Well, starting at Lucasfilm at 19, I think everyone thought I was impressive. And then they met me.
Well, I think, I mean, your love for what you're doing, it comes through very clearly, I think. And I think that probably counts for a lot of people. Like, you want to work with people who love the stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's not like you don't do it for the money. I think also my mom gets a lot of credit for humanizing me. I was basically a feral child. No, I'm kidding. But I like people. I didn't really get people until my late teens, and it was like going from science books to science fiction. I think my mom was like going from people you make up to real people. Anyway, so I worked in Imagineering for about 9 months. At the same time, I was working with Jim on dinosaurs, and I was working on a redo of the carousel which was America Sings, and had been fallow for about 5 years, and they were trying to reintegrate it into Tomorrowland. So I did a ride. I brought Tony McVeigh in on it, who was one of the creature sculptors and designers on Jedi. And we designed a bunch of aliens for this crazy ride that would have been amazing. And like a bunch of things happened. So that was happening, and then Jim and I had started working on dinosaurs, early brainstorming, and I'd done 2 sets of drawings, and then he passed away. But Disney or ABC bought the show anyway, and so I left Imagineering because that ride turned out we started in like 1990, and by end of 1990 or middle of 1990, Disneyland Europe, Euro Disney had opened, and it tanked. Yeah. So suddenly they killed all development. They were like, holy crap, we got to pull back. So all the development on rides stopped, so for me it was good timing, because literally I left, and like 2 months later they killed everything we'd been working on. And so I worked on dinosaurs, and that we can start with that on your...
Yeah, absolutely, because that's got to be a fascinating conversation.
And actually, I saw that you just interviewed Eric and Julia Leewald.
Yes.
And I had brought them in on a project I was developing with Jim about, it was going to be a CG TV series, animated series, about genetically altered and like robo-copped dolphins working with humans in like a Sea Lab kind of show, where it was dolphins and a killer whale that were working with people, sort of the way, I don't know, if you ever read any of the David Brin stuff, the Uplift series, it was that kind of idea, like a science fiction thing in the future. The idea was the Earth was now inundated with water, and so man, because of global warming, yeah, that was prescient too. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So Eric and Julia wrote the script. Eric was, I think, busy with X-Men at that point. But yeah, so worked with them, and still friends with those guys. So yeah, a lot of fun people passed through the Henson company, and there, yes, we can start with dinosaurs next time.
Absolutely. And before we wrap it up today, though, I've got to ask you about Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and Lazy Town.
Wow. Yeah. I think Lazy Town was first. That was like 2004. I mean, I think Foster's came after, so we'll do Lazy Town first. I had done a Muppet TV movie at that point, Very Merry Muppet Christmas. Mm-hmm. And I got a call from a producer in New York saying, your name came up. I'm working with this guy in Iceland who's doing this kid show. He's done a pilot, like a premise pilot, and it's puppets and live action and computer-generated backgrounds. And there's not a lot of people with experience in those 3 things, and you're one of the people that has that experience.
Right, you're the guy. Wow.
Yeah, so I'm like, okay. He said, well, they want to shoot it in Iceland. It's this guy, Magnus Scheving, who created the show, is a big hit in Iceland. I'm like, okay. But they want to meet with you. I'm like, all right. So I talked to them on the phone. I was on a conference call with Iceland, and I flew out there. It was like, I think, November of 2003, maybe. Talking to them. And so early January, I flew out to Reykjavik, And basically we made a deal, and I did the first episode of the series and then directed the second. I did 2 episodes or 3, I don't remember now. It was 2 or 3 episodes. And became very good friends with a number of people there, but particularly the guy who plays Robbie Rotten, who's the kind of the breakout character and the villain.
Yeah.
Named Stefan Carlson, or Stefan Carl. And a lovely guy, and just became best friends with him, and really had a blast working with him. The show was crazy. We called it Crazy Town, the amount of work that they wanted to do. It was a high-def show, and there were only 3 Sony high-def cameras, or red high-def cameras at that point in existence, and he had 2 of them. And it was just nuts what he was trying to do, or ultimately did. I mean, it was the power of like just being stubborn. But so I worked on these 2 or 3 episodes, and quickly realized that Magnus was crazy. He just, well, in terms of what he wanted to do, he wasn't actually crazy. But look, I get it. That he didn't get where he got to by being like reasonable. But I just didn't want to live in Iceland for a year and direct. And the way he tried to challenge you was by insulting you. It was like,
yeah.
He wanted to, someone had told him, it really came down to this. Someone told him he could shoot the show in 3 days. I'm like, you can, but not the way. He wanted to shoot it like Citizen Kane. And the pilot he'd done was gorgeous. It was great, and all these great camera moves and all this. I said, but you can't shoot it in 3 days to make it look like that. You can shoot it more like, wide shots, cross singles, move on. And so after the first episode, which took like 8 days just to shoot it that way, he's like, this is not, you need to storyboard it. I'm like, the storyboards don't help at all. I know we can add shots, but with this 3-day schedule, you're never going to make it. And he's like, if you are a good enough director, you can do it. I'm like, I'm not that good, man. You should show me. And then the producer like literally jumped across the table. Was like, no, you're the director. You need to do it. So I quickly realized that he was just going to be frustrated with me and tell me how, hold on a second.
Sure.
Should have put it on silent. I'm sorry.
Oh, we can always take a moment for the monsters. There's no problem there.
It's probably a junk call. I get a lot of them now.
Well, what's interesting about Lazy Town is it was one of the shows that my son really liked when he was young.
Yeah.
And nothing looks like it. It is so unique, even among children's shows that tend to have kind of a unique look and everything. Nothing else looks like Lazy Town.
Well, and there's a reason for that, because it was done without a network's influence. I mean, I've designed shows that don't look like anything, but they usually go, kids won't like that. So
right.
That's what I'm saying. That to Magnus's credit, he designed the show with a couple guys in Iceland, and it was amazing looking, and it was just very, very ambitious. And that was the problem. He wanted to make like feature film quality, and I would have loved to have done it, but we needed 8 days an episode, not 3.
Right.
So knowing that he kept thinking that it was because I was lazy or because I just wasn't good enough or whatever, even though he offered me like 15 episodes out of 20 or something, I'm like, I just don't want to deal with that drama, because he was very, what's the right word? Confrontational. He's like, you are not good enough. I'm like, yeah, you're right, I'm not. And he's like, well, then I can do it. I'm like, hey, you do it. And they were like, no, when he does it he takes 16 days. And again, I'm not slagging the guy. I just think he didn't realize what he was getting into, and he'd been some bad advice, and he was kind of stuck because he was on the hook for it. So ultimately, they made 2 seasons, and he went bankrupt, and I think he's quit. From what I've heard, he's quit being a show producer and went back to being. He was a world's champion aerobics guy.
Whoa.
Yeah, he really bootstrapped himself. From that, he turned to the show Lazy Town, trying to just, basically teach kids how to be physical and active. Yeah. Anyway, I became really good friends with Stefan, the villain, who's funny. He's Robin Williams funny, or Jim Carrey funny. He just happened to be Icelandic. He played the Grinch for a number of years here in the States, traveling around doing a live stage show of the Grinch, and he just stole the show. And sadly, he's been stricken with pancreatic cancer.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I'm going to try and go out and visit him. He just texted me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, can I see you before I leave? And so, yeah, that's been tough, because he's a lovely guy. He's got a wife and kids, and they're all fantastic. And anyway, sorry not to bring you down, but that's lazy.
No, this stuff happens, man. That's the other side of meeting so many people that are great, you know?
Yeah. And then Foster's happened because Lauren and Craig, the creators of it, were fans of the Muppets, and they heard I was available because I knew friends at Cartoon Network. And so they asked if I'd be interested in writing episodes. I'm like, yeah. And so I wrote 3. They made 2, and they asked me if I would be. It was Cartoon Network has a lot of changeovers in management, and so when they hired me, they're like, we can't hire a full-time staffer, but we'd like you to be our full-time freelancer. In other words, we'll just keep giving you shows, and you'll write them, but you're not going to have a staff position. I'm like, that's great. I love freelancing. I can still work with Muppets. I'm like, yeah. So it was going to be great. So I did 2 episodes and worked on the 3rd, and then suddenly I stopped talking to them, was talking to a producer guy, and things got squirrely and a little weird. Again, not with them, but with the producer guy who was just doing his job, but suddenly they weren't returning calls. And finally I'm like, what's up? And essentially they just said, well, we've been given a dictate that we can't hire freelancers. We have to have in-house people, and we can't hire anyone new. So we're going to go with in-house people. I'm like, okay. I mean, I wasn't offended. And I asked them later because I stayed friends with Lauren and Craig, and I said, was that thing? Did I offend anybody? Nope, that was it. We just couldn't use you anymore. I'm like, oh, that sucked, because they were fun to write. It was a fun show, and Barry was very Muppety, like, core characters. And Boo, and I like Boo because I said he's like Pepe is like Boo. He's just kind of a selfish jerk. Who are always the fun guys to, like Daffy Duck. They're just fun to write for because they can just act badly, and yet they're not going to learn their lesson. It's, what is it, in drama, people learn a lesson. In comedy, they don't.
Well, and that's what was so funny about it is, you had virtuous characters on the show, but Boo, who was kind of the primary character, was not one of them.
Well, yeah, he's the instinct. Without him, you would just have a bunch of nice creatures being nice to kids.
Yes.
And, Sesame Street. And Boo is a complete instigator of, like, I don't want to do it. He's just a selfish jerk.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, with a heart, but... it was really fun to write, and I wished I could have done more. I love working with Lauren and Craig. They're super creative and supportive, and I had a blast. Even stuck in some Star Wars jokes in one, which was fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's another one that we all watched together as a family. We had a lot of fun. I mean, it is. It's just a fun show, and it's one of those that transcends. Like, it's not a kiddie show. It's just a great show.
Right, exactly. Well, like the Muppets, it's just fun, and it's there's bad characters, and much more than the Muppet Show. I think Pepe now is probably the equivalent of Boo, where he'll sell his friends down the river to make some money, but then feel bad about it, But I think Pepe, if I had my druthers, I'd have him drive more stories. Also, he's done by Bill Beretta, who's like an amazing. He played the dad in Dinosaurs. He was in the suit, and then realized he actually was a good puppeteer, and he's become an amazing puppeteer. He imbues them, just like Jim did with Kermit and Dave Goles with Gonzo. And since Jim passed, is having people like that to create new stuff with, because I think that's the only way the Muppets are going to survive, is if, it's like Mickey, Donald, and Goofy.
You're breaking up a little bit. I think Skype is angry at us.
We've gone over our time.
We infuriated the Skype gods. They don't appreciate taking advantage of their free service. Let's wrap this one up.
Sure.
Because we will have plenty of time for Muppet Talk at Dragon Con, which is coming up. It's right around the corner.
I know, it's like 4 weeks from now.
Yeah, it is upon us, which is why when I shot you that email, I was like, well, lots of Dragon Con things happening. But what do you, for the listeners for this episode, what are you up to right now? What are you getting into?
Talk about, sadly. Well, I mean, I'm pitching to Netflix and Marvel. Marvel TV and movies, Netflix TV ideas. So I'm waiting to hear on some Muppet thing. Yeah, sorry, I can't really talk about any of it because none of it's. I do have a show coming out in Netflix. Again, they won't let us. I wanted to promote it at Dragon Con. I was originally going to do a panel on it, and Netflix said, nope, we control our market.
Yeah, that Bo actually originally had pitched a panel about it, and then he was like, nope, Netflix said no. Yeah,
they put the kibosh on it, so I can't talk. all when it does, I mean, just check out my Instagram or my Facebook page. It's Kirk R. Thatcher on Facebook. I'm going to get a web page at some point soon, but right now it doesn't exist, so Facebook's the best way to...
Awesome.
And the last thing was the Muppets Live. We just did it in London, and it was successful. But as of this moment, there's no new live shows coming up, but I'm sure we'll do... My opinion, that's not official, and don't quote me or say Kirk Thatcher said there's going to be a live Muppet show in New York, but that's the major city. It's either that or Dubai, where they can afford it.
Right, exactly.
New York's an obvious place, but it's Broadway or something. But anyway, blah, blah, blah.
Hey, no, that's good stuff, man. That Muppets Live show, because, of course, there are clips from it all over the place now, and that's something I would love to see get
I'm losing you.
Wider. Oh, are you losing me too?
I think I lost you.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
But you've been coming in and out a little bit. So we'll
sign off and do this live.
Absolutely. I will see you at Dragon Con, and thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for coming on and doing the non-Muppet portion of your career for Needless Things.
Hey, it was awesome. I love the way you let it just happen. That's great.
Oh, this is what I love, man. Conversation.
Yep. Well, it's a good thing you practiced as a kid with your DJ work.
Exactly. All right, man. Well, I will see you in just a few weeks.
All right. Take care. Have a good one.
Later, man.
Bye.
You know, it's funny how much of a blessing and a curse Skype is, because without Skype, I wouldn't be able to do interviews like that. I wouldn't be able to do stuff with our pal Chad or even our head of research, Ryan, because he's out of state. So it's an invaluable tool for me, but at the same time, it can be very frustrating when things like that happen. Because at the end there, I'll tell you guys right now, I did a lot of editing on the last probably 10-15 minutes of that conversation, because Skype just started going in and out, and Kirk couldn't hear me, and I you couldn't hear him. And I had to go in and kind of do some splicing. How are you at splicing? If you know that quote, find me at Dragon Con and I'll buy you a beer. I'm not even kidding. If you see me and you can tell me where "how you at splicing" comes from, I will buy you a beer on the spot, or from the nearest spot, I guess. But anyway, yeah, I had to really work with that to make that last part listenable. But the rest of it was fantastic, right? I cannot wait to meet him in person. I will avoid my usual celebrity shyness and ask him to take a picture with me. And we're going to do a live panel, I hope. I hope the scheduling works out, because Kirk is just freaking awesome, man. I just love talking to him, and I can't wait. Like, live conversations, and that's the other thing about Skype, is it's just not as good as a live conversation. There's certain cues, physical, body English type stuff that you miss. It's just not the same, and I do the best I can. But live, you guys, you're not going to want to miss this one. So stay tuned. Keep an eye on the Dragon Con schedule and on my schedule to find out what's going to be going on. And I got to get back to it. So that's it for this week. I love you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Needless Things podcast. You're the best. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Downcast, or in the ears of a Trader Vic's employee. Love you. Mean it. Uh-huh.